Hello, I hope that you're having a very wonderful day. Welcome to this part of the Reg Talk. So, for today's Reg Talk, we will be talking about the nativist theory. Okay, but before that, let me formally introduce myself. I am Maria Estrella Rosales. A lot of people call me Star as my nickname. I am an online instructor and English as second language teacher to international students and of course, today's webinar speaker. Okay, so we will have a lot to talk about during this webinar. As I've already said earlier and in the first slide, as you already saw, we will be talking about the nativist theory. So during this 20-minute webinar lesson, we will have its definition, the key aspects, the main proponent, foundation, evidence, the critical time period of the nativist theory, the LAD and the HUG, or the language acquisition device, and the universal grammar, the debate between nature versus nurture, the theory's challenges, and of course, its contributions. All right, so let's get started with it right away. So, have you ever wondered when you were a kid, or even now, at a very young age, how are you able to learn a language, even though no one really taught you how, or you did not really receive direct instruction of how to learn a language or how to gain communicative competence? So I know that maybe you have already asked yourself this, and the nativist theory might provide the answers that you are looking for. So let's get on with it. The definition of the nativist theory. Okay, so not to be confused with the divine theory of language, if I'm not mistaken, regarding biblical texts explaining the origin of language. Okay, the nativist theory is an approach on language acquisition of the linguistic field that believes that humans are born with the innate capacity to acquire language. So we have the genetic capability to view, learn, okay, and understand language as a communicative competence. So in 1976, Eric Landberg suggested that language is a species specific behavior, meaning that it is biologically determined by your species. So of course, humans are a different species than animals. And humans are the only species that have this type of language or communication means. So, unless you have already held a long conversation with an ape or a cat, then it is true that our kind of language can only be found among us, between humans. All right, so let's get on with the key aspects or the key things to remember about the nativist theory. So, according to this theory, the acquisition and understanding of language cannot just come from the human brain alone. According to Glyman in 1995 and is supported by Pinker in 1994, there must be a pre existing structure in the mind in order for us to organize and interpret experience to then produce a language. So here we have another statement that is basically the summarization or the summary of the nativism view. Learning language is more of a maturation than learning from scratch. So, what does this mean? So, what does this statement entail? When we say learning language is more of a maturation, it basically says and postulates that we already have the skills that we need to learn language. What we only need to fully acquire it or to fully, let's say, to fully utilize the language is to mature it. what do we do, or what happens when we mature? Obviously, we learn new things, right? So when we learn new things, we apply those new things that we learned to the ones that we already know. And what happens to that? So they actually believe that we only refine, revise, and correct the skills or the knowledge that is already wired in our human brain. Instead of just learning from scratch or learning from a blank state with no other prior knowledge of language, the nativists believe that we already know what language is. We know that it's a system. What we just need are environmental triggers or factors to use it. So let's have the main proponent of the language theory acquisition nativism. So here we have a picture of Noam Chomsky. So who is Noam Chomsky? Of course, Noam Chomsky is a world-renowned social linguist, cognitive science, and critic, of course, in the linguistic field. So everyone who is studying language already knows Noam Chomsky. And according to him, there are actually really solid foundations of the nativist approach. And these are the language development facts that have been observed in children. So the first one says that children acquire language rapidly. They acquire language effortlessly without apparent direct instruction. And of course, the last one, they create a rule by system for language. Okay, a rule based rather. All right. So these foundations of the theory are the reasons that nativists found this approach or this perspective. Hence, it is called the foundation. But it is not just hypotheses. Okay, so we actually have evidence to support these foundations. So the first one earlier, if you still remember. Okay, the first one said that children acquire language rapidly. So they acquire um, communicative competence at a very fast pace, while adults actually struggle for decades to master the complexities and the abstract rules of language or a second foreign language. But children are able to do this still. So, why is that? Okay, so the nativist theory might explain the answer in our later discussion. So the next one earlier was the language is actually acquired effortlessly. So meaning there is no difficult challenges that face the children when they are understanding the language or their mother tongue when they are still learning it. Um, Actually, what's interesting is that adults or the utterances that adults demonstrate to children are actually very poor models or poor examples of utilizing language. But young children still hear these poor models and they still manage to actually use these fragments as input and then construct grammar from that to more complex sentences or utterances than what you would expect if they had reinforcement or actual direct instruction. So, which brings us to the next evidence on the approach. Okay, so it says here that um, children actually acquire language without direct instruction. And even if the adult actually gives directions to the child, it's still very rare. And as I said earlier, they are very poor models. So, how can children actually understand that language is a system? So, another evidence that we can prove this is that the rate of progress in children language acquisition, is the same regardless of the quantity or the quality of the utterances that they hear surrounding them. So they create a rule based system without direct instruction in a very short period of time and without difficulty. So, why is this? It would be very hard to believe this, right? Because they're children. How are they supposed to know that unless the nativists postulate that we already have the skills to do this. So, like as I've said earlier, it's just a reaffirmation of maturation of language acquisition. So we only need to mature the human brain in order for us to fully acquire a language. So these are evidences that lead to the belief of the nativist theory. And apart from that, there are actually multiple areas of the brain for a language. Neurologists have even identified them, that there are parts of the brain for perception, comprehension, and production of language. So these evidences and these foundations are already good, but there is one more thing that we have to remember in the nativist theory, which is the critical time period. All right, so before we continue with the critical time period, let's just review what we have learned so far in the first part of our webinar. Okay, so we have the key aspects, the definition, the main proponent, and the foundation and evidences. Key aspects, okay, please remember that the nativists believe that language is actually innate when it comes to human beings. Main proponent of the language is Noam Chomsky. The language acquisition theory is Noam Chomsky. Okay. And then the next one is foundation. So there are four foundations. So the first one is that children acquire language effortlessly, then rapidly without much instruction or direction, and then they create a rule-based system. Last one is the evidence. We just discussed this one. Okay, so they have the same rate of progress in language acquisition. They have a rule-based system, okay, that they produce after hearing poor models of adult utterances. And of course, we also have the time period. Adults struggle to master language, but children have no difficulty at all. So let's continue. Let's move on to the critical time period. All right. So the evidences and the information that were mentioned in the theory are already very reasonable. But it is important to note that there is a time limit or a sensitive time period set by nativists in human language acquisition. And this is what we call the critical time period. So, nativists believe that when this time period finishes or it is ended, then children actually have very much difficulty when it comes to human language acquisition. So it is called critical because after this period ends, then it is almost impossible for people to actually acquire a language. A very good case of this, or very good example of this, is the cases of Jeannie and Victor. So I think these cases were already very famous when it comes to people who are studying linguistics. But let me just reiterate for those who do not know. Okay, so Jeannie Wiley is actually an abused child who was treated as an outcast from the world. So she was living in her house for the entirety, almost the entirety of her childhood and her adolescent years. She was not exposed to any type of social interaction, and actually, she showed behaviors of animal actions instead of human ones because, like I said, she was not exposed to language at all. So, what she would do is that she would bark or she would hiss, just like what animals do. So that is a very good example of the critical time period. A lot of nativists use her and Victor of Averon as examples because they are the ones who missed the supposed critical time period, and it was proven that it was impossible for them to actually acquire a language after they missed it. So Victor is another example of that. So Ginny Wiley was considered as a feral child, and so was Victor. So Victor and Jeannie were not, unfortunately, not able to acquire language. If I'm not mistaken, one of them, I don't remember who, but one of them actually understood a bit of language, but both of them were not able to fully acquire it. So it is a very sad story, but this is a good example or case study of the critical time period. Now let's continue with the language acquisition device, or what we call it as the LAD. So Chomsky in 1965 actually explained that the mastery of a native language in such a short period of time, despite the highly abstract nature of language rules, is because of the LAD, or the language acquisition device. So this device is a metaphorical little black box in the human brain with four properties. So, distinguishes sounds, organizes data, and acknowledges rules and engages in evaluation. So, the first one is the ability to distinguish speech sounds from other sounds in the surrounding environment. The second one is that this device allows people to organize the linguistic data that they have as input into various classes that can later be refined or revised. The third one acknowledges rules, okay? So this one pertains to the knowledge that we have as humans at a very young age, okay, that there is only one specific kind of system in language, and other systems are not necessarily possible. Okay, the last one engages in evaluation. Okay, so here we have the ability to engage in constant evaluation of the developing linguistic system so as to construct the simplest possible system out of the available linguistic input. Okay, so compared to the stimulus response theory, or the SR theory, that could not really explain the creativity present in a child's language. Okay, Chomsky tradition argued that the creativity and abstractness and even the aspects of meaning can actually be explained um, with the existence of the language acquisition device, or the LAD. So this might support the claim of Marcus in 1999 that babies can actually they are able to tell the difference or recognize new patterns from the ones that they already know. So that is another evidence of the language acquisition device. Okay, now let's move on to another theoretical concept proposed by Noam Chomsky, which is the UG, or the universal grammar. So coming from the term itself, the universal grammar pertains to the similarities of the characteristics that children have globally internationally, as the term suggests, universal. So this is an attempt to understand what children have, that regardless of environmental factors or aspects and even stimuli, children are still eventually brought to the process of language acquisition. So this is just another interesting concept about the nativism view, because it recognizes children's ability all around the world to acquire language, even though they have different cultures, they have different traditions, they have different aspects, and of course, factors when it comes to acquiring language. So, children's attempt at a language is actually systematic than what people think. A lot of people think that they are just making mistakes all throughout, and then afterwards, they learn what is right. But instead, actually, the truth is they are trying a lot of different outputs, okay, from what they receive as input, and then they test them in speech and comprehension. And then afterwards, they just refine, revise, and reshape. And sometimes when they are wrong, when they recognize that they are wrong, they abandon them when they grow older with age. Okay, so John Burko, I think was the pronunciation of the name, observed that children learn language as a system. So this is another backup to the foundation of the theory earlier, that language is an integrated system and not as separate or different, um, discrete items, okay, in communicative competence. So, for example, if someone were to demonstrate to a child about glinging, okay, so the adult would demonstrate that to a child. What is glinging? This is glinging. The child afterwards would then know and recognize or acknowledge the other people who they know, who know how to do glinging or have glang or have glinged. So they recognize that it is related, or at least connected with each other. Moreover, in the theoretical grammars that were found in children, it was deduced that kids actually use pivot and open words. So these words often are not related to each other. I mean, they do not belong together in the same type of class, but they are called pivot words because children are actually able to pivot from the first word to the second one. So they pivot from the first, and then they go to the second word that are often regarded as open. So children are actually not capable of language acquisition. I mean, it's not an action that they do. Chomsky postulated that the language learning process is a phenomena, or a social phenomena that happens to children, and not it's not something that a child does. Now let's continue to the nature versus nurture debate. Okay, so to simplify, the nature view comes from the theory of nativism, that language is innate and that we actually have language acquisition device inside our human brain. The nurture view of this debate is the empiricism or the constructivism, okay, views of language acquisition theory. So, Jean Piaget and Noam Chomsky actually debated on these views. John Piaget was the one who claimed the constructivist view or the nurture view, and Chomsky supported the nativist view since he was the one who proposed it. So Piaget viewed the human child as an agent that slowly operates and then gets better at it over time. And Chomsky said that the human brain was already pre-programmed to acquire language, but we still need environmental triggers to um, start the ball or keep the ball rolling. Okay, so that brings us to the challenges of the nativist theory. So, in the nature versus nurture debate, the empiricism or the constructivism theories actually go against the nativism approach. So, this can be found, okay, further discussed in the challenges of the nativist theory. So here we have the PDP model, the connectionism, the social interactionism. So the PDP model, or what we call as a parallel distributed processing model, is a model that actually debunks or corrects the claim of the nativist view that language is actually generated from the mind. So the PDP model says that it is not generated, but instead it is simultaneously processed as information, which brings us to the next one, the connectionism as a model of nodes and patterns. So connectionism refers to the model of nodes and patterns um, that represents language, knowledge, and how learning occurs in the human mind. So instead of assuming that children have the innate capacities or the capabilities to actually acquire language, so the connectionism is more careful when it comes to the hypothesis. They are rather, our children are rather introduced to a process that is based from the exposure of many examples. So, to simplify, nativists think that is innate, but the connectionists think that children are just exposed to numerous numbers of examples, which is why they know that language is a system because they have basis. They have standards or examples to base it from. So that is what the view of connectionism is. And fun fact, actually, the connectionists or people who believe in connectionism have actually created computer models that were fed linguistic data as input, but they were then asked to produce output, and it was found that there was no prior knowledge of these computer networks. These computers that were made for the experiment did not have any um, knowledge whatsoever on language, but they were still able to produce the output because they were fed tons of linguistic data that served as examples of language, which would explain the computers and maybe children as well to know what language is. Now, let's continue with the social interactionism. So, social interactionism doesn't really doesn't necessarily go against the nativist theory, but this theory more or so emphasizes the importance of social interaction when it comes to the language acquisition process. So it mainly focuses on the last, or what we call the language acquisition support system, that talks about the daily contacts or the significance of daily contacts and emotional bonds of children with the people around them. So they first become aware of the communicative nature, the turn taking of conversations and discourse, and then they recognize that same pattern to then construct their own sentences. So children receive a lot of feedback about the effectiveness of the language that they use, and they use that to more or so identify what is right and what is wrong when it comes to language. So even though they do not have specific directions from the people around them, they can still communicate because they have observed it from the interactions that they have socially. Hence the name social interaction. So uh, even though this theory has a lot of challenges or a lot of loopholes, as you could say, there are still contributions of the approach that personally I think are really great for our understanding of human language as a whole. So, this nativist theory actually gave birth to freedom from scientific restrictions because it made use of hypothesis and different um, theories of language acquisition. And it also gave way to the construction of Noam Chomsky's universal grammar. And even though a lot of people are against the nativist theory or people who disagree with it, the universal grammar is used in a lot of subfields in linguistics. So it has a really good implications to the human language. Okay, and last one, we have the systematic description of the human mind's studies. So with this amount of research, okay, with this enormous amount of research, this theory actually gave way to other theories that help us understand, or at least try to understand, how the human language works. So, what is at stake in the child language acquisition debate? So, it's not just about how children acquire language, but also how the human mind or how the human brain really works. It attempts to show us or at least trigger our understanding towards the human brain. So, is there really a region of the brain that is dedicated to language or acquiring language? And if that is true, then this would support the modular perspective of the human language. Can other species actually understand language too or acquire them? So, those are questions that are important to research, and it would not have been possible for us to further our understanding in the human brain without Noam Chomsky's nativist theory. So, how we understand language as a system is at stake as well. In the human child language acquisition debate, it's not just about specific theories or beliefs, it is about our existence, basically, and the parts of our existence that are included as well. So, in conclusion, I want to leave you with this quote from Avram Noam Chomsky himself. We shouldn't be looking for heroes, we should be looking for good ideas. All right, so that is it for our 20-minute webinar lesson. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, my socials and emails and also contact numbers are in the slides. And here are the credits and references for our sources. And that is it. I'll see you again next time. Bye bye. Thank you for listening.